Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to today's episode of the Chimney and Fireplace Success Network. And if you're joining us today on YouTube or on Facebook, or now we're even broadcasting today for the first time on LinkedIn or watching us on the replay, I want to appreciate you joining us today because today I think we've got a really special subject matter that we're going to bring into this today. Now, usually we have a guest on here and we'll hold him off to the intro music. But be honest with you, today it's a little bit different because our guest today is a really good friend of ours. And be honest with you, he's kind of like a partner and we talk a lot of stuff out. And earlier this week, myself and Taylor Hill, our guest today, actually had a discussion. At the end of it, I said, "Man, what you doing on Friday at 11 a.m. Central Time?" And he was free. And I said, "Well, I'd like to invite you to join us." So today, I promise you, if you run a company today, this is a subject matter that you need to open your ears up and you need to be aware of. So, Sheryl, what's your thoughts on today's subject matter?
Well, quiet quitting is definitely something that's became a word now that was actually been doing for many, many years, but we have thrown it up now and we found a word for it. So all of us are going to have to be aware of it more now than we were. So we'll discuss more about what quiet quitting is here shortly.
That's it.
Oh, Jerry, you're frozen. And Cheryl, I think you're frozen too. Taylor, we might have to take it over.
Well, starting to say that's what happens sometimes.
So,
Okay.
Brandi, I'm just going to ask you, what do you think about it?
yeah, so I brought stats, of course, because I have to know what are the statistics on this. And then I'm disappointed in myself because the one thing that I wanted to do before the show that I didn't get done is Jerry told me there's a bunch of TikTok videos on this. And so I actually wanted to watch those and see like these people that are quiet quitting, what are they saying? And I didn't get to that part, but it's an interesting phenomenon. I was trying to think if I had ever quietly quit, and I don't think I have, but it'll be interesting. I can see some scenarios where one might quietly quit.
I
Yeah.
think we've all kind of quietly quit on certain things. So it's just a matter of we fall short of, doing it and we don't give our 100%. I think I'm understanding the quiet quitting correctly. Taylor, is that what we're looking at? Someone that just kind of backs out without actually walking out the door.
Well, I think there's actually several different ways you can quietly quit. I think the first way that we don't realize that we quietly quit because we just get disinterested in our position and our jobs. And I don't think people realize, if you have staff that is kind of tired of what they're doing and not, but they do it and they this. The other thing is it's really difficult for a lot of companies, especially small companies, to have a progression where somebody feels like when they start, they can go to the next thing. And, they just feel like they don't have a way to improve anything and they're not going to the next step. There's no clear pathway, if you will, to the next thing and the next thing. And I think those people are, can easily quietly quit just because they're bored. I mean, they're bored. They don't see a pathway. They don't know what's coming next in their life. And in that particular scenario, I think we're at fault as business owners by not really communicating either a pathway or communicating how they can get better, or we need help in other areas. Would they be interested? We assume a lot that we shouldn't assume. And so we don't communicate well. And so for those people that do that, I can see how they do it. They don't even realize they're doing it. They're just disinterested. Then there's the other side of it, that there are those actively, especially with remote work. And I know that, a lot of the service companies and hearth companies don't have remote workers, but we're hearing more and more of them actually hiring remotely for CSRs and, different positions, maybe accounting and some of those things. The ones I'm concerned about are the ones that actually work remote that already have a full-time job and they're getting multiple jobs and they're just working kind of part-time on every one of these full-time jobs, doing the minimal. And and doing it intentionally. So I think those are two different things that we have to set aside and say, are we looking at people quietly quitting intentionally? Or are we looking at people quietly quitting because we as business owners are not doing what we need to do?
Yeah. And I apologize. It looks like I quietly quit a while ago, and that was completely out of my control. So I had to go out, come back in. So anyway, let's get rocking and rolling with today's subject matter. Taylor, I came back and heard what you said. So like I said, this is an interesting thing that we all have distinct points of view on here. So Sheryl, I'm going to go to you first. What is your point of view as you've done the research, as you've read up on this? And like I said, this is something that we simply saw hitting in the last few weeks on social media. So what's your thought process, Sheryl?
Well, I think we all see it. And as you know, I'm not a big business, so it makes it a lot harder sometimes, like Taylor said, to be able to work with it and to have all the nuances that it takes. So I've been reading up on it a lot. Does it drive me nuts? Yeah, it does. But I think we're all going to fall privy to this, because I think now, maybe it's because social media drives me nuts. I think now that most people seeing that you can quietly quit may expedite it some. I hope I'm wrong. But on the other hand, us as leaders, maybe we'll start noticing it more and fixing some of the situations.
Yeah. So Taylor, you were into part of, but continue on. You were expressing what your point of view is on this quiet quitting phenomena. So go a little deeper. What are you seeing? And
Jerry might have
also,
quietly
if you
quit
would, you
again.
shared a story with an applicant. There we go again. That applied for a job and his expectations. Can you go into a little detail with this, sir?
So I'll actually tell two stories. We had somebody that quietly quit last year, and I had no idea how long. I still don't know how long he quietly quit. But the situation was basically everything that he was responsible for, I found out he had offloaded that on other people. So the job was actually getting done. And guess what? He wasn't doing any of it. So it took me about 5 seconds to figure out what was going to happen to him. And he no longer works here, and basically what I realized is I got his entire job absolutely covered, and I saved a salary. I mean, that was X amount of dollars, substantial amount of dollars that went back to give raises to other people, that took on what he was supposed to be doing. So people can quietly quit in a lot of different ways. And that's a good example of, it's not just about the work getting done, because that's what we always look at, is the work getting done. When the work is getting done and you think that person's doing the work, until somebody raises a flag and says, well, I'm doing this. I don't know why you guys keep asking him to do that. Whoa, wait a minute, So that's one thing. It's that inspect what you expect, kind of a deal. You got to make sure that the people you're assigning to do the work are the people that actually doing the work, because people will offload those if possible. So that's number one. So the second one is when somebody comes in, and I understand with student loans and with all the debt and what it costs for college today, which is, I think that's the bigger problem. My personal opinion is the cost of an education is ridiculous. That and the fact that we push kids to go to college that maybe shouldn't. There are other avenues. That's a different subject, but I think it's part of this. When somebody comes to you and they've got X amount of student debt, they've just gone through college, and they have an expectation of what the job should be paying as opposed to what you can pay. That's another big deal. And if they take your position and are unhappy, they start in an unhappy position. So that's another thing. When people start with you and they're unhappy right from the get-go, you can't hardly blame them, because they're just mad. But here let's get curious about this. Why do these things happen? That's what I want to know. It's not I get the effect on a business. I get the effect on an employee. But talk about, why does it happen? Why are kids coming out of college with unrealistic expectations? Who's setting those expectations? All right. Talked to my business partner yesterday about this. He had a very insightful comment about the media and what the media is talking about. When every business is compared to a multi-million, sometimes billion-dollar business, that's what the media is talking about. Well, the truth is, and I don't have the actual stats for right now, but when I looked it up a few years ago for something I was talking about at a convention, over 60% of everybody employed in this country is employed by a small or micro business. Those businesses, of which all of us are, we don't have the same issues that a very large corporation has. And so when the media just totally discounts and doesn't talk about the effects for our businesses, then these kids come in and they're putting their applications with us with totally different expectations. I'm a marketing company. I can't pay what Google can pay. I can't pay what Amazon can pay. I just can't. So I think we have to start getting real with our kids when they are younger and start talking about how to listen to media, how to actually cull through that so that they have a realistic expectation when they actually go to work in the first place.
And Taylor, you were telling me a day about some young man that applied for a job, and he asked you about the details or the requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And then he asked you, he said, okay, how many hours a week is this going to work? Is this going to take?
You want that one.
Okay. And then you told him it's 35 to 40 hours a week. And then he had a problem because when am I going to spend time with my family? Okay. This also comes into play, but that was the story I was talking about. You shared with me a day about that job applicant that you had.
I have so many stories around this. It's crazy, but yeah, and that's the other thing. We've got books out there, the 4-Hour Work Week. We have people out there online, in Twitter, TikTok, all that. I can't tell you how many people out there saying, all you have to do is work 10 hours a week and you can make X amount of dollars. You don't even have to stay there. You can make gazillion dollars and travel the world. Just get this. The latest statistic survey put out for high school seniors of what do you want to do when you grow up? Do y'all have any idea what the number one thing is that they want to do?
Bill Gaines?
No.
What is it?
They want to be an influencer. Whether it's on TikTok or whether it's on YouTube, that's their number one goal. And for every one of these people on TikTok and YouTube that are making whatever, I don't know if they make that money or not. They say they do. Just take them for their face value and say they do make that money. How many of them out there are not making anything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're struggling. So my point is, we have such unrealistic expectations that we are setting our kids up with. And no wonder they have mental health issues, anxiety issues. When somebody works for me and we have a very loose, y'all know this. My guys, they work on their own schedules. Most of my full-timers can do everything they need to do most of the year within 35 to 38 hours. We have a flex Friday. So if they want to work 10-hour days and get things done and take Friday off for 3-day weekends, most of them do that. I don't have a problem one. But when somebody comes to me and says, this job is just anxiety ridden. It's like, why? Why is it? What is it? And they're like, well, I have to talk to people. What? I mean, I'm serious. These are some of the things that I've gotten. I just don't want to have to talk to anybody yet. My everything. So what I'm telling you is we got people coming out of schools right now that are, in my view, they are, I hate to use this word, but they're not handicapped in the sense that they can't function, but some of them mentally are having a very difficult time functioning.
Yeah. So, Brandi, you did a lot of research. You actually came up with an interesting graphs that you put up just before our broadcast about the percentage of people that are actually quiet quitting right now. And as we go into this, I want you to think, because I'm going to talk about some of the things that you can be looking for to know that this is happening. So, Brandi, your point of view in this discussion.
Well, first of all, I have a quiz for you guys. So do you know what the number one place in the world is for quiet quitting? It's
Marketing
Canada.
companies.
Well, it's Canada. We're number 2. The United States is number 2. So I have many thoughts on this. I kind of want to go back to kind of what Taylor said earlier about the employer responsibility. So one of the stats was 79% of employees report they would stop quiet quitting if given more recognition. So I want to talk about the employer's responsibility and also the personal responsibility. So I do believe that that is a huge issue, is just not giving employees the recognition. We know that from our coaching when I meet with CSRs and them not feeling appreciated. So that's where I think like the employer responsibility comes in on. And then we've talked a lot about stay interviews. I think that's where a stay interview, to get inside the person's head and what are they thinking. So hopefully you can prevent some of this quiet quitting. But from a personal, that's also where I would turn it around and say to the employee, well, why didn't you come and tell me you were bored? Why didn't you come and tell me you didn't feel appreciated, so that we could have a conversation around that? But that requires a level of maturity that isn't always necessarily there. I also wanted to go into part of the reason that some of these people say they're quiet quitting, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, is they're working for people, myself included, who are older, have these expectations of you have to be on 24/7. And so they're getting emails at 11 o'clock at night from their boss that then they're reading, and then they're stressing about and not sleeping. Or they're expected to answer the phone at 11 o'clock at night when the boss calls. And I do agree that there needs to be some boundaries, and those boundaries haven't always been there, especially from my generation. I was taught you work, you do whatever's asked of you, and put your head down and don't complain. And that hasn't always necessarily been good. And what we've seen is that has led to anxiety and burnout in some of the older population. So quiet quitting in that sense, I think, isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, I think it's that person's responsibility to have that conversation with their employer. Like, hey, when you email me at 11 o'clock at night and I read it and then it keeps me up all night because I'm worried, that's not a good thing. Also, though, on the employer responsibility is it's making sure we have the right fit. So I'll give a couple examples. So I've been interviewing for a CSR person for the winter, an additional one. Interviewed a guy this week, loved him. He was fantastic. But one of the questions I ask every candidate is, if you could have your ideal job, money's not an issue, location's not an issue, what would it be? Well, his would be to work from home. So that told me right there, he's probably not going to be a good fit for me. I was able to then connect him with another company, another chimney company, in fact, on the East Coast that I knew was looking for a remote CSR, and make that connection for them. Had I hired him and then he is offered a remote position 2 months from now, I'm probably going to lose him, and I've spent all that money training him. So it was my job as an employer to realize, hey, this guy's great and he would probably work really hard in here, but is he going to be happy? And the answer is no. So I need to let him go where he can be successful and be happy. Had another gal I interviewed, loved her, offered her the position. She wanted to talk to her wife about it first. Great. She talked to her wife, got back with me yesterday, and she ended up accepting a position with a much larger corporation here in Kansas City. That, going back to Taylor's thing of small business, they had benefits that I can't offer as a small business. But again, that goes back to, I would have loved to have had her, but that was the right thing for her and her wife to do, and they made that decision. And again, now it frees me up to find the person that is going to be happy here in this smaller environment. And then I want to kind of bring up another phenomenon that we're seeing. So we're seeing all these people that have left their jobs during COVID to take jobs that were offering way more money. So there were all these companies like poaching employees and offering them the sky. And now what we're finding is those people are quietly quitting, and those companies are also shutting down, and those employees are going back to their previous employer and begging for their job back. So I don't know if any of that made sense. That was kind of all over the place, but those were just my thoughts at the moment.
Yeah. And here's mine. You know, when I looked at this originally, I actually got a couple different ideas of what's behind this. And some of this has been enlightening by reading the blogs, the articles. Randy Pennington, he wrote a blog on this right at the same day that I put out my first video. And he said, I was a person that quiet quitted. And he went through where he had became disenfranchised with the company he was working for. In other words, he didn't feel his value. And Brandi, it's like you said, he didn't feel he was rewarded. He didn't feel whatever. And that's one side of this right here. And it's, again, goes back to what you're saying, which is to celebrate the things. And that's a word that needs to be used, of celebrate. Patting on the back, just telling people thank you, doing a great job, recognizing people. That's one of the solutions right there. But the other is, and I often say this, a client will tell me that someone has resigned. And I said, okay, let's think back a little bit. Was there a trail? Was there a history? And often what we find out is someone starts cutting back because of that disenfranchisement. And what actually happens is, if you can't turn it, you're going to end up with a resignation in 6 months to a year. And I often tell people, hey, you know, they may have resigned today, but they actually quit 6 months ago. And what you've got to do is do exactly what Taylor said a while ago. You got to have the processes to examine what the productivity is. What's happening? What is that person turning out? You got to be able, and 2 words I learned from you years ago, Taylor, that I use very much, is you got to track and measure what's happening in your company. And so many people don't track and measure. They don't look at it. Like Brandi knows how often we talk about waste and how much money is being lost in companies due to waste, because they're not tracking, they're not measuring. They just get used to it happening and they don't even see it any longer. It's just disappearing. And I'm afraid that's what may be happening here, is we're just not observant of what's happening. And also, are we losing touch with our people? Do we know what's happening with our people in their personal lives? Because a lot of times someone can have personal issues that is also going to come in. I mean, you could be as simple as, we're all pet lovers here. I don't know one of the 3 of you that if something happened to one of your dogs, it's not going to affect you this day, because all of us have animals that are almost like our kids at this point. Okay. So these are all the different things. So Sheryl, what would you add into this conversation based on what you've heard from the 3 of us?
Well, basically, I mean, you're all right. I like Taylor took it to the nth degree there, and there are things that we need to do, but I agree with Taylor. We're fighting the war of the internet, of them speaking to the huge groups or about the huge groups. And I've always worked in smaller companies, so it's much harder to trail down and figure out what's going on until it's a little bit later in the big thing, because you don't have that many people to compare it against. Plus, we've always been, people complained about being micromanaged. So I think that's where a lot of people saw that was when we were trying to I look at it 2 ways. Micromanaging is you're on their back doing everything. But sometimes I think a lot of the smaller company people think you're in the face too much. But the one thing that I did read that turned me, was kind of interesting. They were talking about that along with the health insurance, that companies needed to provide mental health insurance now, because that was becoming probably more of a need than the physical insurance. When many years ago, I mean, I don't know if we were not allowed to go nuts, but we just, like Brandi, you get up, you go to work, you do what you're supposed to, you come home, you do what you're supposed to, you go to bed, and you repeat the next day. And you never thought about it. So I'm curious at what age the quietly quitting is hitting the most. I know it's the younger ones the most, but where's it starting in the line down? And I'd like to hear Taylor speak on that and Brandi, because I think they're probably done the research that may can narrow that down.
Yeah, and Taylor, I'm gonna put that to you in just a second. But you just said something, Sheryl, that went to what Brandi said, which is people want to be influencers. But the problem is people are so easily influenced. Okay, being an influencer is a lot harder than it is to be influenced, and that's what happens today. People commonly get influenced. So Taylor, take off on what she just said.
So I guess one of the things that I would say is when you start talking about age group, I look at it a little bit different. I look at it as generational. What happened to, my grandfather was a farmer. He was the largest independent farmer in the United States in the 60s and 70s. So I come from somebody that had huge farms. He lived in town. And when I went to visit with him on my break in the summers, guess where I was? I've hoed cotton, I've laid irrigation line, I've driven tractors, I've planted. I mean, I've done just about everything there is to do on a farm, learned how to plant vegetables, I just learned all that stuff growing up. Um, you know, I wasn't insulated from the pain, is what I'm going to tell you. I mean, I didn't get to sleep in till 10 o'clock and have my grandmother take me out to the fields after I got up and had a good breakfast. He would hit the door, and at 5 in the morning, we were up eating breakfast, whether you were awake or not, and you're in the truck and you're moving. So we worked. That was my vacation. And I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old during that time. So I got to see what my work did. I got to see the bounty, if you would, of the work. When my grandmother would cook, we knew where the chickens came from. We knew where the food came from. So that's where our work, it was valued. Okay. And so I think part of the problem is not what generation did you come up in? Were you taught the value of what work is? In other words, when you work, how does that translate into the rest of your life? Part of that too is the struggle of work. Many of us don't realize that work is hard. Whether you're starting a business, whether you're, sitting doing data entry or whatever, all of us have the challenge of work. What I'm concerned with more than anything else is it's the old adage that you take a butterfly that's coming out of its cocoon. I mean, this has been proven over and over again. You cut that butterfly out of the cocoon and not let them have the struggle to become that butterfly. They're deformed when they come out. They can't fly, because it takes all that for the bloodstream. So my biggest concern for our culture right now, this goes to me even further than the quiet quitting. It's the culture that we're in, not letting people struggle to see what the value is. But that's really difficult when the only place that they have to do that is at a McDonald's, that they don't see that there's something intangibly valuable that's tied to the work they do. So what we try to do is really stress in our business who our clients are. It's not about Spark Marketer. It's about what we do for our clients. I mean, we talk about our mission being that we are a company to serve those who serve the world, so that we tie what we do to every single company we work for and how they grow that company in that neighborhood to provide jobs and taxes and, for people to buy homes and those kind of things. You've got to somehow tie that in so that people have a payoff at the end of the day, that they go to sleep at night not worrying what you're talking about beforehand, about the documentary that you had, but they can sleep at night knowing that the work they did today makes a difference for somebody else, because we as human beings are wired for community. We are wired to love people. We are wired to make differences. We have to show that to our employees and how that works. That's a tough deal. That is that's a high bar.
Yeah.
Because I know people my age that have quietly quit for years.
Yeah. So, Brandi, what would you add on to that? Taylor went very depth and very eloquently. What would you add into that?
Yeah, I don't know, Sheryl, back to your question about, like what age. I do know that the statistics were showing, which kind of goes back to what you pointed out in the beginning, that this has been happening for the last 15 years. Although I remember we used to call people on the job retired. So we would have older people, was typically the stereotype, who they worked there for 30 years. And so they were doing the bare minimum, just riding the clock because they knew they could retire in a year. So we would call them that. Do you guys know how much money is lost every year across all the world, actually, in quiet quitting? If you had to take a guess, just guess a number.
I think it's in the billions, if I remember reading that correctly.
I would say it's in the trillions.
1.5 trillion. But Taylor, the USA is 500 billion. So that's probably where you got the billion figure from.
Yeah, I think that's
so I mean, that's a lot of money we're talking about.
Yeah. So, Sheryl, back to you. Any other words of wisdom from a non-millennial for sure? What's your opinion today?
That I'm really old when you go back to when you look at where people are at now. I think that brings out a feeling of realizing where I'm at in my age is because I, as Taylor, did all of that. I picked cotton. I worked the fields. I took care of the other kids, and we grew up hard. My mother fell when I was 12. And so I became lady of the house. I became the gardener. I became the person that did the work and that grew the vegetables. I don't want to say I wasn't allowed to be a child, but I didn't have the time to be a child. So it gave me good work ethics. And on top of that, I knew my dad and my grandfather would kill me if I didn't. So I had a driving incentive. And I know that's not one that we can put on people nowadays. But I do believe that there's got to be some some work management in people's lives that, like Taylor said, where you can see what's happening, where you can actually hold what you've done. I remember holding the little peepee, the chickens, and realizing they would soon be big chickens that would lay eggs, and then we'd eat them for lunch on Sunday. So that was where I got a lot of my work ethics. And I think, we talk generational, but I think the word work ethics fits in here also.
Yeah. And when you were going through that, remind me, one of the things is it's common we say this, hey, years ago when you were told to jump, it's like your question was how high. And today it is why. But that's actually a good thing because people are now trained to ask questions. But adding to what Sheryl says, I walked uphill to school every mile every day, barefoot in the snow, both ways. Okay.
Uphill.
I love how you go uphill both ways, Jerry.
Both ways. Okay. So, Brandi, what about you? Any closing thoughts? Anything else you would add to our discussion?
I think it just goes back to, if you're an influencer in the workplace, make sure that you have your pulse on what's going on with your people. Make sure that you know where their head's at and what they're doing. Are they engaged? Are they not engaged? If you're raising some of the generations coming up, make sure that you're teaching them that accountability. I remember getting so upset years ago. My daughter was in 6th grade and she had left her iPad at home. We were good friends with her teacher. We lived right by the school. I always taught my kids, if you leave it at home, you suffer whatever consequences the school's giving you. And the teacher drove her home to get her iPad. And I was so upset because that was not what I was trying to teach her. Same way, if I don't wake them up, if they have alarms and if they don't get up for school, then they need to suffer those consequences because I'm not going to wake them up for work when they're older. So I think it's about just, if you have that influence, teaching your kids the right way to grow up and be accountable and teaching them that communication. We always learned that communication is the number one problem in our SWATs, you know, you should have that relationship with whoever your manager leader is, that you can feel comfortable going to them and having that conversation.
That's it. And when we do a SWAT, that's when all this comes out. Like I commonly share with people, we're in here and all comes out today. We got to put it all on the table, and we agree not to get butt hurt, and we agree not to go out after this over with, not intending to share what needed to be shared as we're talking about the weaknesses and the other things. But really important, if you're listening to us, Brandi is going to be able to see later today, since her son is coming home from his first week at college, we will see just what the grade is on when this young man comes back later today. Well,
he was complaining, Jerry, about his acne, and I said, well, you know, you have to wash your pillowcase.
There you go. So Taylor, what about you? You got any parting words on this? Any more words of wisdom? And you've had some really good input today, my friend.
Well, thank you for that. I've got to tell you, Brandi, you'll laugh at this. My mother was an English teacher and a minor in history. My dad was a math teacher, and I never got help with homework. They were like, that's what your teachers get paid for. I grade enough bills. You're responsible for that. And,
I love it.
That was it. Yeah. I mean, I grew up the same way. It was like, just because I'm a teacher doesn't mean you're going to get help. So I get that. I think the thing that I feel, because here's the thing, guys, we can't do anything really about what the media is doing. I can't control that. I can't control, if I hire somebody that's not a good fit, and over time, where I control that is at the hiring. That's where I control what I can. And are we going to make mistakes? Absolutely. I still make mistakes, and we're going to continue doing that. But here's something I think we can control. I think we have to figure out in every type of business that we have how to tie what the employee does on a daily basis to a bigger thing, to something that's bigger than themselves and even bigger than your company. You have to tie in that what you do on a daily basis, how that is meaningful to them, because we are all looking for meaning. We want what we do to have meaning so that at the end of the day, we feel like we've accomplished something. There is nothing more detrimental in my mind than going through a day and getting to the end of the day and thinking I didn't make a difference today.
Yeah. And as you were talking, Taylor, it brought me back to a broadcast we did just a couple of weeks ago with a young man by the name of Justin. And Justin is a technician that works for A1 Garage Doors. And what he was talking about, and I asked him, told me why you went to work here and why do you stay? And I think what he said were gold nuggets. And these were the three things he said. Number one, I can run it like I own it. I can run it like I own it. Number two, he said, I'm actually making a difference in the world. Okay. I'm actually making a difference. And the third thing he said was, my earnings are up to me. It's how much I invest myself into this. And I'm sure Brandi and Sheryl both agreed. Anybody would have been happy and proud to have that young man on their team. I don't care what you do, because you could train him to do anything, but that type of attitude coming out is unreal. So be aware of this. Quiet quitting is a very real thing. Even though it's recently hit social media, it's really not a recent issue. It's just been out there. But like I said, people are going to be influenced. You can bet a lot of your people are on social media and they're seeing these TikTok videos. They're seeing these things. And it's impregnating the ideas into their minds. So hopefully this has been helpful to you today. And I want to invite you to join us next week, because next Friday, due to the schedule of our guests, we're going to be on at 3 p.m. Eastern Time next Friday. And we have one of our most popular guests coming back, to do another episode with it. Taylor, you're a popular guest too, but this guy, he knocks it out. He's known all over the country. People follow him on social media, and being with him is like drinking from a fire hose. And our guest next week is going to be Tommy Mello. And there's also a second treat next week because I'm going to be involved in teaching and training. So next week it's going to be Brandi and Sheryl alone. And Taylor, the weird thing is, when they're on without me, they get a lot of comments, okay? People talk to them. When I'm on, we just don't get the comments. They actually got big conversations. I was coming down the road listening to them the other week. It's like, Lord of mercy, they got more people listening. Maybe I got to get out of this thing, just turn it over to the ladies and let them take this thing. So
I get it.
Yeah,
and you may want to do that. Who knows, Jerry?
That's it. Maybe I got to read between the lines. So Taylor, I appreciate you taking your time out of your day today, as always. And we are CVC Success Group. Okay. And our mission is here to help you. And you see our email addresses on the screen. If you see that might be what you need, reach out to one of us. A conversation with any of us doesn't cost you a dime. Let's talk about your problems. Let's see, maybe we might have the answer. Because I think at this time, Brandi, you feel like we've heard about every kind of problem could come out there in the field to us?
I'm sure there's always something new, but it seems like we've heard all of them.
We see it. We've either lived through it or we know somebody that has, and we've worked through that before. Sheryl, you agree with that one?
100%.
100%. So appreciate you joining us today, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Chimney and Fireplace Success Network.